Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation. I'm presenting chapter 5, Motivating Behaviors. And if you've already read this chapter, you know that it is full of theories and approaches. I'm very detail oriented. As you can see, my presentation is 21 slides, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into as much detail as I'd like. But feel free to download the PowerPoint and review it later if you'd like. Like I said, I'm detail oriented, so I go into a lot within the PowerPoint, and there are a lot of tables that I've designed as well, so feel free. But let's go ahead and start with the nature of motivation. So motivation are the set of forces that lead people to behave in a particular way. Motivation is important because motivation within the workplace is what determines how well we perform. If you're really motivated to do a job, you're probably going to do it to the best of your ability. If you're not as motivated, you probably won't give as much effort. But job performance relies on motivation as well as ability and environment. And that relationship can be seen as P equals M times A times E. And then I listed exactly what those variables are according to the text. In slide 3, we go into the motivational framework. This is important because this motivational framework really shapes all of the approaches and the theories within the chapter. I put a table there as well. If you'd like to read over that, it kind of gives you the idea of how motivation affects needs. So a motivated behavior is usually ignited by an unmet need. So very simply, if you're thirsty, if you have a need for water, you're going to be motivated by that need to go get a glass of water. And then I listed a work-related example for you there as well. In slide 4, we go into the early perspectives of motivation. These are the traditional approaches. This first one, scientific management, for example, was produced over 100 years ago. So the idea that employees need to be motivated to do their jobs is not a new idea. The first one just assumes that, employees are motivated by money. Therefore, back then, people were expected to perform any job that was presented to them because everyone assumed that people just wanted money, which 100 years ago might have been the truth. I don't think people were as materialistic as we are these days. And then going into slide 5, this is the human relations approach. Suggests that fostering a sense of employees' inclusion in decision making will result in positive employee attitudes and motivating them to work hard. So this theory is very similar to the next approach that we're going to be talking about next in slide 6, which is the human resource approach. This one assumes that people want to contribute and are able to make genuine contributions. So as a manager, you need to assume that the people that you hire can contribute and want to contribute, and therefore it's management's job to promote participation and create an environment that encourages contribution and collectiveness. You need to put our ideas together, and then therefore whenever your employees contribute, they're going to have a feel-good perspective to being able to contribute, and therefore they would want to do it more. In slide 7, we go into the individual differences in motivation. The text tells us that one of the biggest mistakes that management makes is assuming that everyone's motivated by the same thing. Because we all come from different cultures and different backgrounds, it's definitely not the case. But everybody can relate to self-efficacy. Self-efficacy was just touched on in chapter 3. And then task-specific self-efficacy is a person's belief in their capabilities to do what is required to accomplish a specific task. And the components that go into those are magnitude, strength, and generality. And I list the definitions for those there. And slide 8, we go into the need-based perspectives. So the first one is very famous, the hierarchy of needs developed by Abraham Maslow, which I'm sure we've all heard before. And then very simply, need-based theories assume that need deficiencies cause behaviors. So just like earlier, if you are thirsty, you're gonna go get a glass of water. All right, and so the important thing to think about Maslow's theory is that he believed while traveling up the list of needs, if a lower need becomes deficient again, we're gonna travel back to that need. So keep that in mind as we go into the next slide in the ERG theory. ERG stands for existence, relatedness, and growth. And then I listed these needs and how they're similar to Maslow's needs. So if Maslow's theory is more relative to you, you'd be able to compare those. So the difference in the ERG theory is that we can accomplish 2 needs at once. Whereas Maslow kept us restricted to one level, the ERG theory suggests that we can accomplish the relatedness and growth needs at the same time by doing one task. All right, and then we go into slide 10, the two-factor theory. This one identifies motivating factors with affect satisfaction, and then hygiene factors determine dissatisfaction. So you can see on the right there, motivating factors range from satisfaction to no satisfaction. Hygiene factors relate from dissatisfaction to no dissatisfaction. The no satisfaction and no dissatisfaction we can just assume is just like neutral, having no opinion on the subject. So you can be satisfied with your recognition from a boss and then be not dissatisfied by supervision, just having no opinion on the supervision. Slide 10, we go into the acquired needs framework. This one centers on the needs of achievement, affiliation, and power. And then there are a few aspects that go into this framework that we need to understand. The need for achievement is our desire to accomplish a task or goal more effectively than was done in the past. People with a high need for achievement set challenging goals for themselves. They work very hard. They often take on more responsibility than they need to. Slide 12, we're going to go into the need for affiliation, the need for human companionship, and then the need for power, the desire to control the resources in one's environment. And then I provided examples for people that hold those as well. In slide 13, we're going into the process-based perspectives on motivation. Process-based perspectives focus on how people behave and their efforts to satisfy their needs. So rather than focus on specific motivational stimuli like pay or achievement, this perspective focuses on the way that people choose certain behavioral options to satisfy their needs and how they evaluate their satisfaction once they obtain those goals. So going into slide 14, the equity theory of motivation. So this is basically about being treated fairly in relation to other people. So this theory focuses on people's desire to be treated with what they perceive as equity and to avoid perceived inequity. And then that's just, like I said, being treated equal. So forming equity perceptions is a 4-step process. People will evaluate how they're being treated by the organization. Then they form a perception of how their comparison to another person is being treated. So how, they are treated in comparison to you. Then they compare the situation of their own with their own situation and develop an impression of fairness or unfairness. And then finally, depending on the degree of the situation, the person will choose to pursue a response to that fairness or unfairness. And then that brings us into slide 15. These are the motivational equity theory. If someone feels equity, usually no response needs to be taken. If you feel you're being treated fairly, you really just keep doing what you're doing. But if you're being treated unfairly, there are 6 common methods that people usually take. We may seek to change our outputs, we may change our outcomes, we can attempt to alter our perceptions of ourselves, and finally, we may simply try to leave the situation. Going into slide 16, the expectancy theory of motivation is also called the VIE theory. This one suggests that people are motivated by how much they want something and the likelihood that they perceive they can get it. So if you think that you really can't become an NBA star, you might not go to tryouts. But the effort to perform expectancy is a person's perception of the probability that effort will lead to performance. So performance to outcome instrumentality is the individual's perception of the probability that performance will lead to certain outcomes. And then outcome and valence. Outcome are anything that results from a particular behavior, and valence is the degree of importance of those outcomes. And then I listed the table underneath exactly how it is presented in the text. Slide 17, learning-based perspectives to motivation. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior or behavioral potential resulting from direct or indirect experience. There's classical conditioning, which is a very traditional view, a simple form of learning that links conditioned response to an unconditioned stimulus. And then learning as a cognitive process is a contemporary view. This suggests that people actively participate in their learning. And then I listed underneath that is the process of how that happens in relation to classical conditioning. Slide 18, reinforcement theory and learning bases on the idea that behavior is a function and of its consequences. Simply, behaviors with unpleasant consequences will more than likely be repeated. In the same light, behaviors yielding unpleasant consequences will more than likely not be repeated. Social learning is when people observe behavior of others, recognize the consequences, and alter their own behaviors as a result. This is one of my favorite kinds of theories. And then that brings us into slide 20, behavior modification. the application of reinforcement theory to influence behaviors of people in organizational settings. There are several types of reinforcement behavior that can be used: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. And then I listed how those relate to the behavior in their definition. And then the question for future analysis is, I'm asking everyone, can you think of a time when you've used a learning-based perspective in your workplace? Personally, I've used social learning many times. I look at other people to see how their behaviors are being rewarded or punished, and then I base those views on how I behave in the workplace. All right, thank you so much for listening, guys. Have a blessed night.